The purpose of this demonstration is to show how to utilize the pivot report functionality in FleetWorks to analyze some invoicing data. Let's assume that our accounting department has asked us why the fourth quarter expenses for vehicles is higher than the average of the other quarters of the year. To answer their question, we'll need to drill down on some data provided by FleetWorks. Under the Invoice category of the Customer Reporting tab in FleetWorks, click the Settings link under Invoice History. Under the Customer Selection tab, choose any of your accounts for which you want to report on. Select the account from the available, click it, and then click the right arrow to move it into the selected. You can do the opposite to move anything out of that selected. Once you're done, click Save. To determine which fields will appear on our report, click the Data Fields tab. This list will default with certain fields based on the report selected. You may add or remove fields as you see fit. To simplify our demonstrations, we've already modified the list in the selected column to show only the fields we want included in the report. To add a field to your report, highlight it in the Available column, and again click the arrow to move it over. When you're done, as always, make sure to hit Save. Now that we've selected the customer accounts and the data fields we'd like included in our report, we need to create the pivot table itself. So we'll go back to Customer Reporting and the pivot table under Invoice History. To format the pivot report, click the Show Fields window. This will show all the fields previously selected in the settings. Drag and drop the fields as you'd like them to appear in your pivot report. In our example, we will look at the most commonly used invoice categories in order to determine why the Q4 expenses are so high. So we'll drag invoice billing date, and driver full name into the row fields. Then we'll drag and drop each of invoice disposal adjustment, invoice fuel, invoice maintenance, invoice rent, invoice other, and invoice grand total down into the aggregate fields. Once we have all our fields selected, again click Update. And we can filter the data based on time period. So we're going to look at the fourth quarter from October 1st through December 31st. This gives us a report that is first sorted by invoice date, and within each invoice date, it is sorted by the driver's name. The columns of data are each of those included in aggregate fields. Use the scroll bar along the bottom of the window to scroll left and right to see the remaining fields. We can also update the number of rows that are visible. We'll select 50 to see the most data at one time on the window. Let's collapse the rows by invoicing date. Simply clicking on the arrow. Now we can see each invoice summarized by the cost category. If we scroll to the right, we can see that the invoice grand total and then is the highest in November. Let's explore the November costs further. Let's say that we just want to look at the November data. Since we know the expenses are highest that month, we can reformat our pivot table to simplify our report. Click the Show Fields window, button once again, and drag the invoice billing date from the row fields to the filter field category. Click Update. Now we want to click the filter icon of the billing date. In our case, we only want to look at the November invoice. So we'll deselect October, December. That's okay. Now we can scroll to the far right to see the grand total for each driver on the November invoice. We can scan through this data and notice that pool vehicle Madison incurred the most expenses on this invoice, coming in at over $9,000. We can then scan through other columns for that vehicle and see that the majority of expenses come from rent. If we want to see how the rent breaks down for each vehicle assigned to the pool vehicle, we can add the asset number to our pivot report. So we'll go back to the Show Fields button. We'll find the asset number and drag that into our row fields below the driver name. Once we have that, we can update. Our report is now sorted by driver name, and within each driver name sorted by asset number. If we expand the arrow next to pool vehicle, we can see that there are actually 19 vehicles making up the rent for the pool vehicle. Note the list continues on to page 2 of the data. Let's assume that the accounting department has a follow-up question in regards to the November data and would like to know which driver's vehicles incurred maintenance that month. Keep the pivot report sorted and formatted as is to look at the sum of invoice maintenance column to see which drivers show an amount. Again, we can see a significant amount of maintenance incurred for the pool vehicle Madison line item. When we expanded that driver's name to see which specific items incurred maintenance, we see that asset number 13867 had $500 of maintenance, and asset 23162 had almost $600 of maintenance for the month. We can then run the corresponding maintenance invoice transaction report under the maintenance category to see the detailed maintenance data for these specific vehicles. We can also export our pivot into Excel if we'd like to manipulate it there, or save the report for others to view. To do this, format the pivot report as you'd like to see the data in Excel, and then we can click the Export button on the top right. We can also save the version of the pivot table for later use modification. To do so, click the Save Report button and then give it a name. This version of the report will now be saved under the Custom Ad Hoc Report section of the main Customer Reporting window.